7 years you've stood in my kitchens.
Nothing, my king.
No one doesn't make my wolf go still.
I buried my scent for 7 years, until the Alpha King's boots stopped in my doorway. The clatter of a dropped ladle, the bell for kitchen inspection hadn't rung that early in 3 winters. I was the girl who scrubbed the ash from the hearth before dawn. The girl the other maids stepped around like I was a spilled shadow nobody wanted to mop up. Nyra doesn't look up when the kitchen door groans open, she never does. 7 years of ash-gray dresses and lie-burned hands have taught her that eyes on you are eyes that remember you, and remembering gets you killed. Her white apron is smudged with flour, her shoulders curved inward, a posture built from a decade of trying to take up less space than a draft. Then the room goes silent. Theron fills the doorway like he owns the air itself, velvet and wolf fur, a crown he doesn't need to wear because his stillness announces it. He isn't looking at the bread. He isn't looking at the fire. His golden eyes have found her, and they aren't moving. The other maids freeze mid-motion, dough forgotten on their palms, because everyone in this castle knows what it means when the Alpha King stops. He isn't hungry for food. He's hunting a scent he thought he buried 7 years ago. Follow to find out what Theron does next, and drop the city or country you're tuning in from below. I want to reply to as many of you as I can and see just how far this story is traveling. The guards came for her before the bread had even cooled. Nyra didn't fight when they pulled her from the scullery, fighting drew eyes, and eyes were the one thing she'd spent 7 years avoiding. She kept her gaze on the stone floor as they marched her through corridors she'd only ever heard described by other maids in hushed, reverent voices. Corridors with tapestries instead of soot. Corridors that led, impossibly, to him. The king has requested a personal servant, the guard said, like it was an honor and not a sentence. She was given a new apron, stiff and unworn, and pushed through double doors into a chamber warmed by a fire she hadn't built. Theron stood at the window with his back to her, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. She catalogued the room instead. The furs, the maps pinned with iron nails, the sword resting against the wall like an afterthought that could kill her in half a second. "You'll bring my meals," he said finally, not turning. "You'll tend this room. You'll speak when spoken to." "Yes, my king." Her voice came out smaller than she wanted. He turned then, and she made the mistake of meeting his eyes. Golden, unblinking, and fixed on her with an intensity that had nothing to do with servitude. "And you'll stop pretending I don't know exactly what you are." She didn't sleep that night. By the second week, Nyra had learned the geometry of his moods, the way his jaw tightened when the council overstayed their welcome, the way his shoulders dropped a fraction when he thought no one was watching. She told herself she was studying him for survival. She wasn't sure that was the whole truth anymore. Theron, for his part, seemed to be fighting a war with himself that had nothing to do with the kingdom. She caught him staring at her hands as she poured his wine, at the curve of her neck when she bent to stoke the fire. Once, she felt him inhale sharply behind her, like a man trying to solve an equation that refused to balance. "Your wolf doesn't like me," she said one evening, testing the water. "I can see it in your face." "My wolf," he said carefully, "has never wanted anything the way it wants to be near you. That is the problem." She didn't have an answer for that. Neither, it seemed, did he. The vial of nightshade had cost her 3 months of stolen coin and a favor she didn't want to think about too hard. She slipped it into his wine on a night when the castle was loud with a visiting envoy's feast, her hand steadier than her heart had any right to be. If he died, she could disappear in the chaos. If he died, she could finally stop being hunted by a scent she'd never asked for. He drank it in one long swallow, watching her over the rim of the goblet the entire time. Nothing happened. "Nightshade," he said, setting the cup down with unhurried precision. "A decent dose, too. You've been planning this for a while." Her blood went cold. "I don't know what you..." "Alphas are immune to most poisons by the time we're 20. He stood, and she backed toward the door, but he was faster, always faster, his hand closing gently, not cruelly, just certain, around her wrist. "I let you try. I wanted to see how far you'd go to hide from me. Then kill me, she whispered. Get it over with. I've had 7 years to kill you, Nyra. Her name in his mouth was a blade and a confession at once. I'm not going to start tonight. The room felt smaller after that. Not with danger, with something worse. Understanding. Your mother's name was Alira, Theron said, 3 nights later, when the fire had burned low and neither of them had moved to feed it. She had your eyes. I know because I watched the purge from a hilltop I was too young to be standing on, and I have never forgotten her face when she pushed you into a grain cart and told you to stay silent. Nyra's hands had gone still in her lap. You were there. I was 12. My father commanded it. I didn't understand yet what it meant to be an alpha, or a king, or a monster wearing a crown. His golden eyes found hers, and for once there was no hunger in them, only something rawer. I've spent 7 years hunting a scent I couldn't place, and it wasn't until you walked into my kitchen with ash on your hands that I understood why. I wasn't hunting an enemy, Nyra. I was hunting the one thing that survived the night I couldn't stop. Why are you telling me this? Because if my council learns what you are before I decide what to do about it, they will burn you in the courtyard by morning. He crossed the room, slow, giving her every chance to step away. She didn't. So we are going to make an arrangement. You will stay close enough that I can protect you. And you will trust me exactly as much as I've earned. Which is not yet, but I intend to change that. It was not a romance. It was not even, yet, an alliance either of them fully believed in. But it was a hand extended across 7 years of buried grief, and Nyra, against every instinct that had kept her alive, did not pull away. The sickness started a week later. It began as a tremor in her hands, easy enough to hide behind trays and teacups. Then came the fever that no healer could name, burning through her at night until she woke drenched and gasping, the sheets smelling faintly of something wild and floral that hadn't been there before. Theron noticed before she admitted it, of course he did. His nostrils flared every time she entered a room now, his composure cracking at the edges like ice under weight. You smell different, he said one morning, watching her with a wariness that hadn't been there before. Not fear, exactly. Reverence, maybe, laced with dread. Stronger. It's spreading. I feel like I'm burning from the inside, she admitted, because there was no one else left to tell. Like something's waking up that's been asleep a long time. He was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice had the careful stillness of a man choosing his words around a blade. My grandfather kept records of the old bloodlines. Wolves who didn't just carry scent, who commanded it. Who could call others to them without meaning to. He looked at her like she was a storm gathering just out of reach of shelter. I think your mother didn't hide you because you were cursed, Nyra. I think she hid you because you were never meant to be found until you were strong enough to survive what happens after. Outside, the first horns of the solstice preparations had begun to sound through the castle, and Nyra pressed a trembling hand to her chest, feeling the fever pulse beneath her skin like something with its own heartbeat. Whatever she was becoming, there would be no burying it in ash and lie this time. The forest at dawn smelled like nothing Nyra had ever known, no lie, no ash, no lie stitched into her skin to keep her small. Theron led her past the tree line himself, no guards, no witnesses, just the two of them and the frost cracking under their boots. If your power is going to surface, better here than in my throne room, he said, though the tightness in his jaw suggested he wasn't entirely sure that was the only reason he'd brought her. And if I can't control it? Then I'll be the only one who gets hurt. He said it so simply, so certain, that something in her chest cracked open. She pressed her palm to the bark of an ancient oak and felt it, a pull, low and electric, humming up through her arm like the tree itself recognized her. The frost around her boots melted in a slow, spreading ring. Behind her, she heard Theron's breath catch. Nyra. His voice had dropped to something rougher. When she turned, he was closer than she expected, golden eyes darker now, fixed on her with a hunger that had stopped pretending to be anything else. Do you feel that? My wolf isn't confused anymore. It knows exactly what it wants. Theron. Tell me to stop, he said, and I will. She didn't tell him to stop. His hand found her jaw, gentle as an apology, and for one suspended heartbeat the entire forest seemed to hold its breath with them, until a horn sounded faintly from the castle walls, summoning him back to a crown neither of them could afford to forget. The council noticed the change in him first. A king distracted, a king who cancelled meetings to walk the grounds with his maid trailing 2 steps behind like she belonged there. Lord Corvain, oldest and sharpest of the council, began asking quiet questions in quiet rooms. Where had the girl come from? Why did the Kitchens have no record of her family? Why did the king's hand linger near her lower back when he thought no one was watching? She has no lineage, Corvain said to the gathered council, candlelight carving his face into something skeletal. No lineage means no loyalty. I want her tested before the solstice. Tested how? Another lord asked. Corvain's smile was thin as a blade. The old way. Fire reveals what blood tries to hide. Word of it reached Theron by nightfall, delivered by a guard still loyal to him. He found Nyra in his chambers and told her plainly, no softening it. They're going to try to expose you at the ball. I need you to understand what that means. I understand it means I run, she said. It means you stay, he said, and you let me protect you in front of every noble in this kingdom, or we lose everything trying to hide. Before either of them could decide which fight to have first, a second horn split the night, deeper, older, a challenge horn. A rival alpha named Draven had arrived at the gates, flanked by his own pack, demanding trial by combat for the throne. He's heard the rumors, Theron said grimly, already reaching for his sword. A king distracted by a kitchen maid is a king ripe for taking. Then let me stand with you, Nyra said. Not behind you. Not hidden. With you. He looked at her for a long moment, the girl who'd spent 7 years disappearing, now asking to be seen at the worst possible moment, and something in his expression broke and rebuilt itself all at once. Then stand, he said. She did. When Draven's pack circled the courtyard the next morning, Nyra stood at Theron's side in plain daylight, her scent no longer buried under lie, rising instead like a banner nobody in that courtyard could ignore. Wolves who had spent years unbothered by anything suddenly went still, ears back, some instinct older than politics recognizing something in her they didn't have words for. Draven's confidence faltered first in his throat, then in his stance. Theron didn't need his blade that day. He needed only to let his court see exactly what, and who, he intended to keep. But a king's court forgives almost nothing so easily, and Corvain had not abandoned his plan. He simply moved it forward. The solstice ball arrived wrapped in candlelight and velvet, the great hall glittering with nobles who had come to see a king dance, not to see him crowned twice over by scandal. Nyra wore a gown the color of dying embers, and for the first time in 7 years, she did not try to make herself smaller in a room. It didn't save her. Corvain's men seized her at the height of the music, dragging her before the assembled court with a ceremonial dagger drawn, the old way, a blade meant to draw blood and reveal a bloodline no illusion could hide. This girl is the last of the rebel line your father destroyed, Corvain announced, voice ringing off marble. She has poisoned our king's judgment. I call for her execution. Touch her, Theron said, voice gone low and lethal, and you'll learn exactly how much of my father's temper I inherited. But it was Nyra's own body that answered first. The dagger's edge nicked her palm, one bright bead of blood hitting the marble floor, and the power she'd been burning down for weeks finally broke its banks. Light bloomed from beneath her skin, gold and terrible and achingly alive, rippling outward until the floor beneath the entire ballroom began to crack in spidering veins of fire and frost at once. Chandeliers swayed. Nobles screamed and scattered. Corvain stumbled backward as the very stone beneath him buckled, ancient magic answering a call 7 years overdue. Theron didn't run from her. He crossed the collapsing floor and pulled her into his arms as marble split open around them, shielding her body with his own even as his guards raised weapons they no longer knew which direction to point. She is not a threat to this kingdom, he roared, loud enough to still even the chaos. She is its future. I claim her as my queen, before every soul in this hall, tonight. It should have been enough. It wasn't. Corvain, bleeding and furious, screamed for her death even as the castle groaned around them, and Theron understood, in that single splitting second, that there was no version of this night that ended with both his crown and her survival intact. So he chose her. He caught her hand, and together they ran. Through the collapsing hall, past guards too stunned to stop them, out into a night lit orange by torches and fractured stone. Behind them, the throne room that had defined his entire life crumbled a little further with every step, and neither of them looked back to watch it fall. They didn't stop running until the castle was a smudge of firelight on the horizon, until the forest swallowed them whole and the only sound left was their own ragged breathing and the distant howl of a kingdom deciding what to do without its king. "They'll hunt us," Nyra said, breathless, blood still bright on her palm. "Let them." Theron pulled her against him, forehead to forehead, both of them outcasts now, both of them finally, terrifyingly free. "I spent 7 years hunting a scent I didn't understand. I'm not losing it now that I finally do." Somewhere behind them, a kingdom without its king began choosing sides. Somewhere ahead, a bloodline everyone thought was dead began, quietly, to breathe again. Comment the first word that comes to mind when you finish this story. I'll be reading every single one, and I can't wait to see how many different corners of the world felt this ending with me.